I'm just relaxing. Can you, Mehreen, can you see me right now?
Yes, I can. All right, we're live.
All
right, hi everyone, and welcome to the 40th edition of LUMS Live. Before we move on to today's discussion, I'd like to remind all our viewers that if you've missed past episodes of LUMS Live, they're available on the LUMS Facebook page on YouTube. Lots of very interesting conversations with some of Pakistan's best and brightest. So go check them out. Today, the topic we're going to be discussing is very close to my heart as a journalist, as a woman who's a journalist, and as someone who's been all too exposed to the dark underbelly of Pakistani social media, which we're going to be talking about in detail. And that is the challenges that women journalists in particular face in this digital age, in this moment where digital innovation has altered the ways in which we consume, in which underbelly of Pakistani social media, which we're going to be talking about in detail. And that is the challenges that women journalists in particular face in this digital age, in this moment where digital innovation has altered the ways. Can people hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I can.
I was hearing myself back actually. So, you know, with social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter functioning more and more as search engines, as sources for news stories, what are the unique set of challenges that this moment has presented for women, reporters, editors, anchors, all of you, and how do we overcome them? So these questions are obviously, they're important, and we've been talking about them for quite some time now, but in the last few weeks, they've acquired center stage in national debate because a group of women journalists put out a joint statement last month demanding that the government take action against what they see as coordinated, systematic campaigns to intimidate them and attack them on social media using accounts that often declare allegiance to the government or to the ruling party, which is the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. So the statement was initially signed by 20 journalists. It's since been signed and endorsed by scores more, and many have appeared before the Human Rights Committee of Parliament to give testimony of the kinds of abuse that they've faced, which range from accusations that their reports are fake news, the launching of organized hashtags against them, sharing their personal details, their pictures, videos, using gender-based slurs against them, threatening them with sexual and physical violence, and so on and so forth. So the issue, I mean, these are all very real concerns, but the statement has also generated some controversy with many women journalists who were not among the original signatories coming forward and challenging the scope of the statement and demanding that just pointing at one party or the government presents a limiting picture of the problem, when rather, you know, across the board, political parties, religious groups, trolls of the security establishment, the army, intelligence agencies are all complicit in this campaign. So now we're at this moment where we have a very important and very lively debate among the community of women journalists about how to take this movement forward. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So in no particular order, I'd like to very quickly introduce our panelists, a very accomplished group of journalists and thinkers who've defined the media and the social media landscape in Pakistan in recent years. We've got Farieha Aziz, who's a journalist and co-founder of Bolo, a digital rights and civil liberties group. Farieha trains journalists in newsrooms in digital safety and anti-harassment, and she also tracks the implementation of Pakistan's cybercrime laws. We've got Mehreen Bokhari, a journalist, television talk show host, who's done primetime news shows on various Pakistani TV channels, currently host of News Eye on Dawn News. We have with us Rahim Shamsi, who's an award-winning multimedia journalist, who's worked again with a number of Pakistani news channels, most recently Sama, and has also worked with the BBC World Service in various capacities. We've got Memon, a reporter and a primetime journalist, currently host of Sawal Ye Hai on ARY News. And I am Mehreen Zahra-Malik, currently Pakistan editor of Arab News, which is a major Middle Eastern newspaper with a background reporting for various international organizations like Reuters, the New York Times, Guardian, so on and so forth. So getting right into the topic at hand, I want to start with you, Farieha. As someone who's an advocate for digital safety, could you summarize and break down for our listeners who might not be familiar with the problem what gendered online harassment is, what kind of forms it takes, this abuse, and in what ways is it different for women and men? Why are women easy targets?
Right. Well, I think the question of why are women easy targets goes back to आपकी जिस तरह का माशरा है या आपका निज़ाम है और उसमें जिन्स का जहाँ तक ताल्लुक है, right? So it's always made about gender. You compare, we're not saying कि you know मर्दों को निशाना नहीं बनाया जाता, चाहे वो सहाफत में हो या और किसी, लेकिन जब औरतों के बात आती है तो उनके जिन्स को निशाना बनाया जाता है. तो अगर थ्रेट्स भी आप देखें तो स्पेसिफिकली जब खवातीन कहती हैं या सहाफ़ी हो जाएं और कोई जो सोशल मीडिया को इस्तेमाल करते हैं, तो रेप थ्रेट्स एक स्पेसिफिकली उनको दी जाती हैं. या सो इट्स सेक्शुअलाइज्ड, इट्स जेंडर बेस्ड. आपको जिस तरह के चीजें कही जाती हैं, जो गालियां आपकी तरफ, और गालियां एक हमारा वैसे भी जो माशरे में जो इस्तेमाल की जाती है, जो मर्दों को भी दी जाती हैं, वो औरत के जिनसे मुंसलिक होती है. So these are some of the societal issues that you see play out obviously when we're talking about specific kinds of abuse or threats leveled against women. And in this context, you know, women who happen to be journalists or commentators or basically are in the public eye. And anyway, जब आप public eye में होते हैं तो और ख़ास तौर पे you know इस्तेमाल में तो आपको निशाना बनाया जाता है. अगर आपकी कोई राय है किसी चीज़ पे, you know different opinion है, तो उसके basis पे भी आपको निशाना बनाया जाता है. So it cuts across obviously professions also. You see this is very very common. दूसरी चीज़ तस्वीरों का गलत इस्तेमाल, morph कर देना, videos पे लगा देना. You know, so privately भी harassment होती है, publicly भी होती है, personal information लोगों की leak कर देना, या बार बार you know harassing किस्म के messages. And then you know वो एक downplay किया जाता है कि वो online तो इतना serious नहीं होता, लेकिन online के offline repercussions भी होते हैं, उसका एक ज़हनी दबाव भी होता है, और psychological impact भी होता है. तो ये तमाम चीज़ें we see play out. Whether it's online or otherwise, when you report these things as well, that they don't go forward the same way.
So, I mean, and this is for all of you kind of one by one, you know, the things that Farieha, you've talked about, you know, what's the worst thing before we get into like, you know, more sophisticated terrain? What's the worst thing you've read about yourself on the internet? I mean, I feel like we should shock people and really bring home the fact of how vile and toxic some of this discourse is. You know, just to give you an example, and sort of, you know, the day that we went to the Human Rights Committee, and you know, everybody gave their testimony. It was a very emotional moment because, you know, all of us have had very similar experiences. And I basically tweeted in solidarity with the movement and said that, you know, it was like a festering wound had been ripped open, and maybe, you know, this is where healing starts. And Skenicha, somebody wrote that, you know, in Urdu, you know, why you whore, why don't you die instead, right? So, I mean, I say this with apologies to the LUMS community and the people listening who might grimace at this language, but, you know, this is what we hear and read every day. This is our reality. The words used are so terrible that we don't want to repeat them, and I think we should. So what are some of the worst things you've read or the campaigns that have really affected you and would help our listeners to really understand the gravity of what we're talking about here? I mean, whoever wants to start.
And you'll have to pick and choose someone, right? It's going to be a problem.
All right, Meher, you go.
Mehreen, I absolutely agree with what you tweeted about as well. I mean, I'm sure it's unaddressed trauma, which every time you visit this or hear your colleagues talk about their pain and their struggles, it just all comes back. So I completely understand that, and something I've been experiencing of late as well. But, you know, honestly, I'd like to build a little bit upon the level of this harassment or the trolling, because, you know, when we speak of it, a lot of times people don't understand, or they say, okay, you know, this is also an occupational hazard, you're in the public domain, and that's absolutely correct as well. The problem is that the kind of trolling that's being experienced right now, it actually essentially subverts every norm of decency. There's, you know, it's unfettered vulgarity that's being experienced right now online. And it is absolutely ridiculous because no law enforcement agency, no government, no political party, it's just an inconvenient truth that nobody wants to open up to or talk about or address. And it's clearly transgressing all limits of decency and subverting every ethical standard that we've been used to in our society, or because of our religion, or just who we are or where we belong. So I think it's honestly like a lot of people don't understand the degree of this harassment or this trauma.
I mean, and that's why to be able to sort of really show people how bad it is. That's why, I mean, if you guys could just sort of give an example of the kind of
honestly, if you ask me what exactly it is that somebody said, I'll be very honest with you. Over time, I cannot pinpoint one thing, but if I really had to right now sit and tell you this, and I don't know what the repercussions of this will be, but what bothers me the most or haunts me to date are the pictures which were taken in the privacy of my home with family members, or as a young 22, 23-year-old girl, those being stolen and leaked, some morphed, some just put on air as they are. That's something that haunts me, literally haunts me, just as a mother of kids, and as someone who actually is very mentally, mentally ready of the fact that these awkward conversations are not very far away. That, mom, what is this? Who is this? How did this happen to you? And it is something I cannot gulp or live down to date. And it happened like 6 years ago, and I can't. Yeah, so that's one thing which I think that I relive on a daily basis.
What about you, Amber?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Meher, where we try not to look at them, but I think for the purposes of the statement and the evidence that we wanted to submit to the National Assembly, I had to go through the horrifying exercise, as did other, my other colleagues as well, where I had to document them and put them together, and I stapled them and I printed them. And I think the one that, there's so many, I can't even begin to say how many. And they come in waves as well, by the way. So I think this is slightly a few months ago, maybe, about 6 months ago, there was one that just stuck with me, is where this person wrote, "This is what should happen to you." And it was a Kermit the Frog. And this is going to be shocking, but I'm going to say that this is an example of something that stuck out. It was a Kermit the Frog with its behind open. And this is what should be done to you. That is one. We've been told that you're too ugly to be raped, for instance, or who would want to harass you? That's minor. There's, and just lots of, it's very, very, I have to kudos to all the women, for instance, I know at the assembly as well, Memon, Sarfaraz, who's, one of the key movers as well. She read out those messages that she gets. And I have to say it takes, and her husband was sitting there. And it takes a lot, it just takes a lot out of you. I'm still trembling just thinking about it, just to read those out. She asked Mohsin Davar, who is an independent MNA, who's a part of the committee as well, Human Rights Committee. And she asked him to read a text message that she'd gotten based on, see how I'm diverting to somebody else because it's so hard to talk about my own, that she'd gotten. So somebody had gotten her number and texted her all kinds of abusive stuff that it was just not possible to read out as well. I mean, I asked my daughter just to staple some of them, and I want to point out that she's 16. So she's old enough and she understands all of this. And she didn't really look at them, but she was stapling them just to help me organize them. And she said, "Amma, is this the kind of stuff that you get?" So Meher, I completely understand it. Kids being a witness to the kinds of things that we face, and how that might even discourage them from, venturing out, to be outspoken, to speak their mind. And, that's one of the reasons I took my daughter along with me, because I wanted her to be aware of the fact that even though this happens to us and others like us, there are people who will stand in solidarity, and it will make a difference. I mean, it will at least, I'm hoping that something will be moved, something.
What about you, Maria? I mean, if you want to add something.
Sure. Listen, again, I agree with Amber over here. It comes in waves. Honestly, I would want to admit it over here कि 2010-2009 में जिस तरह से मैं frankly, बड़ी candidly, opinionatedly tweets किया करती थी. 7-8 years down the lane, I don't do it anymore. पहले मैं जैसे कहते हैं कि अगर बहुत ज्यादा एक्टिव थी, दिन में मेरी 1-2 tweets हो जाती थी, तो अब it has come down so much that probably in 3-4 days I do 2 tweets, or so hats off to those women who do it every day and repeatedly, and they get all the hate and all the feedback or whatever as a result of whatever they're tweeting. मेरे लिए ये breaking point जरा थोड़ा पहले आ गया था. I thought कि नहीं, this is not a space where I want to sort of breathe in anymore. I do go on Twitter, I check out, I have marked few accounts jinke tajziye ya jinki koi news I really value, and I go and read their threads, or there's some very important Twitter handles that I very closely follow, but I do not tweet myself as such, and it's a self-censorship. Nobody told me not to do that. I sort of imposed it on myself, because I don't think my mental well-being is being helped. If I really want, I have my show. I have a 3-hour show every week, and whatever I want to say, my political, opinions about different issues, I go and do it over there. I'm very active on Instagram. I'm very active on my private Facebook, but Twitter somehow, I think I cannot take it anymore in a lot of ways. Though it's very effective. Having said that, आपने मुझसे पूछा कि सबसे नास्टी कमेंट, खैर तो औरत मार्च में तो खैर बहुत ज्यादा ही जिसे कहते हैं ना, hate was directed towards me and subsequently my husband, but एक कमेंट जिसे कहते हैं ना आपके जो दिल में खुब जाता है, it was probably because I lost my mom 3 months ago and somebody wrote something nasty about it underneath my tweet where I was saying that she has passed away. So matlab it's something very small. It was not even a campaign, but जिसे कहते हैं ना कि मुझे लगता है कि यार हम लोग में basic decency या basic जिसे कहते हैं ना, अगर आपको मैं नहीं पसंद तो आप खामोश भी रह सकते हैं, but you don't have to really go down there and make it a point to really hurt me in this moment where I'm already very upset. So having said that, Aurat March I think was something that was a very, very rude awakening for me as a person, because I was not even tweeting about it. So I was just going on television shows. So my clips were circulating. They were turned into memes. They were being circulated in WhatsApp groups. And I was getting a lot of feedback on that. Then again, siding with Marvi Sarmad over that, issue she had with Khalil Rahman Kamar, that got me a lot of hate. So it's primarily जरूरी नहीं कि सिर्फ आपके political affiliations या political inclinations या political views की वजह से आपके हो. मेरा जो personal experience है कि मुझे social issues के ऊपर stand लेने के ऊपर जरा ज़्यादा flack आया as compared to political जो हालांकि I do a lot of programs, I have my clear takes on different issues. So this has been my journey so far, but I would say I'm not that brave as compared to other women who are who are at it every day. When I wake up, I see them.
I think you become less brave over time. I think we all started out being a lot braver than we are now. Probably.
Yeah. So उसमें समझ सो मैं क्योंकि tweet पढ़ती हूँ और आखिरी tweet उन्हीं की दिन में आखिरी और I'm saying, yo woman, you're still at it. Good for you. मतलब नीचे गालियाँ आ रही हैं. ये नहीं कि कोई फूल. अगर आप if I even tweet कि मुझे rainbows और unicorns के बारे में कहूँगी ना, I like rainbows and unicorns, के नीचे भी जी वाली गाली और फिर R वाली गाली. And I kid you not, मैंने अपने Facebook के जो public page के ऊपर R वाली गाली और G वाली गाली blocked words में डाला हुआ है. Even then they find out creative spellings of those words to convey to me.
Just like to circle back to the statement, that joint statement. Amber, if you could very briefly just maybe talk about how this movement came about. I mean, if there was a tipping point, or why all of you guys came together. In the spirit of full disclosure, I have also signed this statement. Anyway, go ahead.
Yes. So, as Maria pointed out, as Meher has pointed out, this is not new. And I think it's just that because social media use has increased so much, and there's, religious parties and political parties have very dedicated official and unofficial social media cells. So it's just become more amplified. And I think it's become acceptable that this is how you deal with the people that you dislike for whatever reason. So for instance, I was a reporter before this, and I covered sectarian issues as well, Shia, Sunni. I've done stories on the Ahmadis as well, and these are two examples of where I did get a lot of problems on social media, and to the point where, for instance, on the Ahmadi story that I did, people sent me daggers as well. So that was scary. And they called my office, and my story was pulled off in my office because, it's an international media organization, told me to be very, very careful and stay at home and be vigilant, essentially. So it's not like this has not happened before, where, there's been a threat to my life as well. And then, as, it comes and goes in waves. You say something, Maria talks about rainbows, I'll just say, Jacinda Ardern should be president of the universe. And suddenly there's a wave of hate as well. So I think this last year, it just became a lot. It became a lot where I couldn't cope with it anymore. And I'm aware of the fact that, for instance, there has been a survey done by Media Matters for Democracy, which asked a number of female journalists across Pakistan how they deal with trolling and social media hate. And 9 out of 10 said they self-censored, which I think is a shame, because I think there should be women perspectives and commentators on politics, on social issues, whatever, who are active, who should be active on Twitter. So I noticed that there was, like me, that there were a few other women who were being targeted, and among them was Benazir. And Benazir was being targeted because of the COVID-19 coverage, and she would talk about discrepancies and all of those things. And I had started, this was at that time, I found that I was being lumped in with her because we were all doing programs on COVID-19, and we were all asking questions, and there's spokespersons of the Punjab government available as well. So we'd ask some questions, and so I noticed that we would be tagged, we would be, especially, even if I hadn't said anything or Benazir hadn't directed any questions, this seemed to be a pattern. And it would, I called Benazir and I said, Benazir, I know we deal with this a lot, but don't you think we should take a joint stand on it, respond before? And we've done that before with the Coalition for Women in Journalism as well. So there's a group of us, and that includes Asma Shirazi and Gharida Faruqi and a number of other journalists as well. And where we would sort of at least respond collectively to these collective attacks. So at least you don't feel like you're alone. I didn't know what we would be doing, whether it would be a collective response or not. But, Benazir spoke to other people, and we got together. Farieha was, in that first Zoom meeting as well. And we discussed how we could do this, because we had reached that point where enough is enough. I mean, why should we be scared of expressing ourselves? Why should any of this happen? This should not be acceptable. It shouldn't be normalized. It isn't okay. And that's really how it began.
So, like Meher, you've gone on the record expressing some reservations with this statement. So, I mean, I guess, Maria, I don't think you've been on the record, but you're not one of the signatories. So,
I'm not.
You're not, right. So, I mean, Meher, starting with you, do you want to explain to our listeners where you and several of these other women are coming from, what you think is lacking in this statement, and why you haven't been able to come, fully on board?
Honestly, in a nutshell, firstly, I think, number one, because we do realize that a lot of feedback or even gandagi that comes with it is an occupational hazard. Magar over time, over a decade of doing this and being at the receiving end of just absolute vulgarity, and like you just think about that, tasavvur nahi kar sakte ki kya bakwas hoti rahi hai. So I think एक किस्म का immunity भी हो गई थी, to be honest. So for the longest time, हम तो अब मैं ज़ाती तौर पे, I'll speak for myself, I was just quiet, kind of just living on with it, right? And you become so dheet. So to say what Maria was describing, कि कुछ सुबह भी होते हैं, रात भी होते हैं, probably one of them, because you become so dheet over time, you're just like, what, to hell with the world, I'm still going to give my point of view. And you over time just kind of become very resilient, or moti chamdi uga lete ho. So it was such a delightful surprise and so refreshing that there were a handful of colleagues who stood up and wanted to talk about it and address this. And it was, honestly, it was really refreshing. Because in the back of my mind, I was just like, ye ek hakikat hai aur ye bas ab hai, this is life, it's the profession you've chosen, and you know what, tough luck, suck it up. And then these girls stand up and they're like, you know what, no, we're not going to suck it up. You're not going to talk down to me like this. You're not going to send me, messages of hate and rape and sexual assault and, condemn my family and my very existence and just the fact that I'm alive and I breathe. So it was amazing. And I keep saying all the more power to them for that. I have no qualms in endorsing where they stand and what they're saying. PTI has actually मुकम्मल तौर पे अगर आप कहें ना कि था कल्चर गाली गलोच का हमेशा से चल रहा है, वो तो मैं आपको कह रही हूँ 2006 से हम जो काम कर रहे हैं वो सुन रहे हैं. और बुरी वाली ये नहीं है कि तब नहीं ये बुरी वाली थी, ऐसी ही थी. The R and the B and the S and the A and the Z, and you don't leave any alphabet out, okay? It's all there. So ये सब हो रहा है. Magar PTI has been a flag bearer in kind of making sure that others kind of jump onto the bandwagon utni shadomat se. So my point was कि यार absolutely PTI might just be leading this this march, but the entire story is not there. The entire story is कि People's Party ने भी मुझे उतनी गालियां दी हैं, नून ने भी दी हैं, establishment भी देती है, religious parties भी देती है, मेरे खिलाफ फतवे भी हुए हैं. I don't want to take a name कि फिर सिलसिला ना शुरू हो जाए. I mean, I've had calls in my office के अंदर, calls in my newsroom कि कहो कि we can have her for नाश्ते के लिए खाते हैं ऐसियों को, तो बस कर दे. वही शिया सुन्नी की बातें कर रहे थे. And then, you know, even otherwise कि ये Indian agent है. I remember there was actually one assassin, Chaudhry Nisar was interior minister. Assassin इस्लामाबाद पहुंच गया था और आपकी स्टेट apparatus कुछ नहीं कर सकी थी तब भी. मुझे कोई एजेंसी नहीं तहफ़्फ़ुज़ फराहम कर रही थी. There was no minister, there was nobody standing up. And में another story कि कौन खड़ा हुआ और किसने न्यूट्रलाइज किया उस थ्रेट को. And the guy was very adamant, I'm here and this is my agenda and फलां बैठक के अंदर फैसला हुआ है that you will die. So ये सारा कुछ होता रहा है. So the point was, I am of the belief that, you know what, if this is going to go on record forever, if this is going in the parliament, and if we're going to push for some action on this, let's just kind of push and make it a bigger punch and make sure that all of them follow a code of conduct. And if they don't have that code of conduct, make that code of conduct and adhere to it and make it public and make sure that all of you, irrespective of whatever political party you belong to, the leaders, the A-line, the first and second tier of leadership, the trolls, because, you know, often dafa ye aapko directly buzra to nahi gali dete na, या आपके इनके फर्स्ट ईयर के ऑपोजिशन के लीडर्स गाली नहीं देंगे, मगर वो आपको इनडायरेक्टली बात कर जाते हैं या ऐसी ट्वीट कर जाएंगे या ऐसी बात कर जाएंगे कि उसके बाद एक बराज ऑफ क्रिटिसिज्म और हेट और वो सारा कुछ आप पे अनलीश हो जाता है. So that is my only thing. It's not that I don't agree with them. I absolutely agree with them. I'm just saying the story is a little bit tad more than what you put down on paper. Let's just put that down as well.
Right. And so, like, you know, just to take forward what you're saying, and Maria, maybe you can answer this. Of course, we agree that, you know, the abuse is widespread, but do you think the government has a greater responsibility, the government of the day, the ruling party of the day? And also, not only that it has a greater responsibility, I think there's also been, as this debate has unfolded, this equivalence between, you know, the government and, for instance, a private citizen like Amber. They'll be like, Amber bhi to ye kehti hai online jaake, ya Mehreen bhi to ye kehti hai online jaake. So, I mean, do you think that we have to hold the government of the day to a higher standard?
Absolutely, I totally agree on this point. लेकिन मैं पहले मैं बता दूं कि जो मैं अभी मेहर ने पॉइंट्स रेज किए हैं, आई कंप्लीटली एग्री विद मोस्ट ऑफ देम. तो मेरा थोड़ा सा इसको मैं ब्रेक डाउन करती हूँ कि हम ये बात कह भी क्यों रहे हैं. वो हम इसलिए कह रहे हैं बिकॉज अभी मुझे इससे प्रिंसिपली लेटर इन स्पिरिट हर बात से अग्रीमेंट है. मुझे जो थोड़ा सा डिसएग्रीमेंट है वो इसकी अप्रोच से है. सो आई थिंक प्रिंसिपली इशू बिल्कुल ठीक है, एड्रेस भी आप बिल्कुल ठीक कर रहे हैं तमाम लोगों को. इसकी अप्रोच जो है ना, मुझे वो फायर फाइटिंग अप्रोच लग रही है. इट्स जस्ट लाइक हाइड्रा's head, you cut off couple of them, they'll regrow. So मैंने कुछ आइडेंटिफाई किया, जो मुझे प्राइवेटली भी जो मेरे साथ बात हुई, और बाद में आई थिंक एवरीवन नोज दैट कि मुझे जो चीज इसमें चाहिए है कि वो ये है कि आप उस पैटर्न को अटैक कीजिए. मैं मानती हूँ कि तहरीक इंसाफ में बहुत ज्यादा ट्रोलिंग होती है, और ये भी मैंने देखा है कि किस तरह पहले जो है स्टेटमेंट्स दी जाती हैं कुछ जिम्मेदार लोगों की तरफ से, और उसके बाद जत्थों के जत्थे आते हैं. माय पॉइंट इज मेरीन कि नाउ दिस इज बीइंग रेप्लिकेटेड बाय एवरीवन. And recently I have actually witnessed it. पिछले 3-4 महीनों में एक sitting provincial government है, चलो let me name it, everyone knows it, People's Party, they have ran 4 coordinated hashtags against 4 channels. और वो भी वहाँ पे एक sitting बड़े मुअज़्ज़ज़ minister जिनसे मेरी personally बड़ी अच्छी बातचीत है, we were friends, and he was leading it and he was not hiding it. So my point is कि ये सबने पैटर्न आइडेंटिफाई कर लिया है, और बाय द वे वो भी फेक न्यूज ही, कि ये फेक न्यूज दे रहे थे, तो ये देखिए हम उसको डिबंक करना चाहते हैं. तो why don't we just attack the pattern, and why would we just attack you know only the head of it? Why would we just do firefighting? इसके अलावा अब आप देखिए आज जो पावर में जैसा बिहेव कर रहा होगा मेरीन, 4 साल बाद ये हो ना हो, ये इवन पॉलिटिकल लैंडस्केप पे भी ना हो, लेकिन जो भी पावर में आएगा, अभी रास्ता दिख गया है उनको मालूम भी हो गया है कि ये इफेक्टिव रास्ता है. तो क्या वो इसी चोर दरवाजे को या इसी दरवाजे को इस्तेमाल नहीं करेंगे? बिल्कुल इस्तेमाल करेंगे. तो इस दरवाजे को बंद क्यों ना करने की कोशिश की जाए? अभी हमें उस दरवाजे के ऊपर जो खड़ा दरबान है वो पसंद नहीं है, और हम कहते हैं कि इसको हटाओ. What I'm saying is कि आप उस दरवाजे को हमेशा के लिए बंद करके सीमेंट लगा के उसके आगे दीवारें चुनवा दे भाई, ताकि आइंदा कोई फ्यूचर में आने वाला उस दीवार को. तो मेरा सिर्फ ना अप्रोच का फर्क है. और अगेन आई हैव सेड दैट कि क्या मैं ये बात नहीं मानती जो स्टेटमेंट में बातें लिखी हुई, बिल्कुल. और अगेन मैं, अगर मेरे साथ नहीं हुआ तो क्या इसका मतलब है जो खवातीन कह रही हैं उनके साथ ऐसा नहीं हुआ, बिल्कुल हुआ होगा. आई ट्रस्ट दिस स्टोरी, आई बिलीव दिस स्टोरी, आई वांट टू बी पार्ट ऑफ इट. बट हियर आई विल ब्रिंग इन मेहर point of view कि why don't we sort of why are we cancelling each other's noise, why can't we amplify each other's voices. तो मुझे लग रहा है कि हमने noise cancelling वाले वो headphones पहने हुए हैं और हम एक दूसरे जो ये सारा ये होना था उनकी तरफ सारा जो फेस होना था इस पूरे आर्ग्यूमेंट का, अब वो हमारा आपस में हो गया, राइट. सो माय अप्रोच इज कि just इस पैटर्न को टैग, स्मैश द पैटर्न. दैट्स माय पॉइंट इज.
So like Farieha or Amber, whoever wants to take this, I mean, how would you respond to some of these ideas?
I think I'd like Farieha to respond to this because, I mean, when we thought of the strategy, Maria just pe aapko etaraz hai, we discussed it together. This was a joint decision of how we should do this. And I think I disagree, and I would like Farieha to answer all these questions. I think there's been an impact. I disagree that this is actually closed doors. The statement, the people who signed after we released the statement, and actually the testimonies and the actual National Assembly Human Rights Standing Committee and the conversation that happened there actually is amplified. It talked about all of those. But I'd like Farieha to respond. I'd like Farieha to respond.
If I can just, so clearly ये तो वाज़े है कि किसी को ये कोई डिनाई नहीं कर रहा कि ये होता है, चाहे वो पीटीआई आज कर रही है या और पार्टीज कर रही हैं. सो फ्यू थिंग्स दैट आई डू वांट टू पुट ऑन रिकॉर्ड, राइट. जिस वक्त अब हरासमेंट कोई नया इशू नहीं है, इसको रोजाना मैं तो केसेस भी डील करती हूँ, रिपोर्टिंग विद लॉ एनफोर्समेंट, डे इन डे आउट कोर्ट में. उसकी तो कोई खास ना रिपोर्टिंग हो रही होती है, सिलेक्टिवली उठाए जाते हैं, कभी अटेंशन मिलती है कभी नहीं मिलती. नाउ द थिंग इज कि ये जो थिक स्किन वाली बात है, एक तरफ हम बहुत सारी चीजों को नजरअंदाज कर देते हैं कि ठीक है, इट्स पार्ट ऑफ द प्रोफेशन, यू डील विद इट. लेकिन आई थिंक द इम्पोर्टेंट थिंग वाज, नो, यू नॉट जस्ट गोइंग टू कीप डीलिंग विद इट बिकॉज इट्स नॉट ओके टू नॉर्मलाइज इट. सो पहली बात तो ये थी कि लेट्स टॉक अबाउट एंड वर्बलाइज एंड पुट ऑन रिकॉर्ड के हो क्या रहा है. उसके बाद अब अगर आप जो अप्रोच है, आपने अगर बात की है कि ये इस पार्टी ने, और ये पहले भी अभी मेहर ने भी कहा, मारिया भी कह रही थी, ये एक सोशल मीडिया जमात थी, फिर वो इक्तदार में आई है. तो इनसे आप क्यों कह रहे हैं क्योंकि इक्तदार में है? जो बात है ना कि आगे की, देखिए अगर नेशनल असेंबली के जो सब स्टेटमेंट पे तो फोकस कर रहे हैं, जो कवर लेटर गया है उस पे भी लोगों को उसको भी पढ़ने की जरूरत है, क्योंकि उसमें बहुत वाज़ेह तौर पे मेंशन किया है कि ये किसी एक मखसूस पार्टी में नहीं, ये तमाम पार्टीज में कल्चर है. जिस वक्त ये मीटिंग हुई थी वहां पे सिर्फ पीटीआई से मुंसलिक नहीं, लेकिन और पार्टीज के बारे में भी ये बात की गई थी. वहां के जो मेंबरान थे मुख्तलिफ पार्टीज के, उन्होंने भी ये तस्लीम किया कि हाँ, हमारी पार्टीज में भी ये मसला है, हमें कुछ करने की जरूरत है. लेकिन फर्क ये है कि जब आप इक्तदार में होते हैं तो आपकी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी ज्यादा है. दूसरी चीज ये कि आगे आने के लिए भी, आज अगर मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन और ब्रॉडकास्टिंग को गए तो वो पीटीआई रिलेटेड नहीं है. कल को कोई भी इक्तदार में होगा, कोई भी उस मिनिस्ट्री को हेड करेगा, कोई भी रियासत के वसाइल इस्तेमाल करेगा मीडिया विंग्स के लिए, सोशल मीडिया विंग्स के लिए, या उनसे जो मुंसलिक होंगे उन पे जो कोड जिनका बनना चाहिए या पाबंद होने चाहिए, ये आगे की बात भी है. तो अगर इस स्टेटमेंट को बुनियाद रखा जाए जो कि ये बनाए गए कि कम से कम किसी ने किसी को रोका नहीं था कि वो मुनज़्ज़म तरीके से कुछ लिखें, कुछ लेकर जाएं, कम से कम एक कदम तो उठाया गया, उसमें और आवाजें मिलाई जा सकती हैं. और यही बार बार सिग्नेटरीज की तरफ से भी और बाकियों की तरफ से भी ये दावत दी जा रही थी कि आप अपने भी जो जबानी आपके साथ हुआ है, चाहे वो पीटीआई हो या पीएमएलएन हो या पीपीपी हो. मैंने पर्सनली पीएमएलएन के बारे में बात की क्योंकि मुझे उनके दौरे हुकूमत में निशाना बनाया गया. मैं सहाफत से तब तक तो हट चुकी थी, लेकिन एडवोकेसी स्पेस में तो थी. मैं उस लॉ को चैलेंज कर रही थी जो बयानिया ये बनाया गया था कि औरतों के तहफ़्फ़ुज़ के लिए है, लेकिन उन्हीं के खिलाफ भी आज वो इस्तेमाल किया जाता है. और जब उनको हिरासत का निशाना बनाया जाता है, वो FIA के पास जाती हैं या वो कोर्ट्स जाती हैं, तो उनको नहीं उस तरह की रिलीफ मिलती. तो मुझे तो उस दौर में वो तमाम वगैरह बताए गए, वहाँ पीएमएलएन के मेंबर्स भी मौजूद थे, उन्होंने तस्लीम किया कि हाँ, हमारे भी इश्यूज होंगे. सो द पॉइंट इज नाउ हाउ टू गो फॉरवर्ड, राइट. कि इसको आपने एक बुनियाद बनाया, एक मखसूस आपने पार्टी के हवाले से बात की, क्योंकि स्टेट के वसाइल, बैकिंग, ये मिनिस्ट्रीज भी हैं इनके पास रिसोर्सेज भी हैं, और इनका इस्तेमाल नहीं किया जा सकता इसके लिए। जो डिस्क्रेडिटिंग होती है, जो विजिबिलिटी होती है, खास तौर पे जो फेक न्यूज का टर्म इस्तेमाल किया जाता है, और मैं बार बार ये दोहराती रही हूँ, फेक न्यूज ट्रम्प का बनाया हुआ फ्रेज है टू डिस्क्रेडिट जर्नलिस्ट हु क्रिटिसाइज हिम। आपने बात करनी है तो डिसइंफॉर्मेशन और मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन की करनी है। डिसइंफॉर्मेशन इंटेंशनल होता है, मैल इंटेंट के साथ होता है, मिसलीड करने के लिए, और मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन वो है जिसका आप भी निशाना बन जाते हैं कि जो फॉरवर्डेड एज रिसीव्ड चीजें आपने भी आगे चला दी बगैर वेरीफाई किए। तो तरीका क्या है? ये तरीका नहीं है कि आपने कुछ जर्नलिस्ट को पिन कर दिया कि ये तो है ही फेक न्यूज पेडलर्स, और खास तौर पे जब आप इक्तदार में हैं, जब आपके पास वजारत है, जब आपके पास आप कोई फोकल पर्सन है, तो इस तरह से करना, यू wield पावर एंड दिस इज नॉट ओके। आपने डिबंक करना या आपने करेक्शन करनी है, तो आपको एक प्रॉपर प्रोसेस फॉलो करने की जरूरत है। ये नहीं कि आप फिर लोगों को इनकरेज करते फिरें कि इन लोगों को तो हमने लाइफ डिस्क्रेडिट कर दिया है, ये तो इनके मुंह से सलाम भी निकलेगा तो आपने गाली देनी है, क्योंकि ये तो लोग ही ऐसे।
But yeah, and you and Amber, if you could I think one of the things that I'm reading about a lot or hearing a lot about, and I think you've touched on this a little bit, is that, the campaign or some of the people involved in it, because of, this misinformation and disinformation, are being accused of being politically motivated, right? I mean, the fact that there was just one party, and the ruling party, it's sort of led to accusations of bias in favor of the opposition parties. There's been a lot of talk about Bilawal taking particular interest in this, which has also raised concerns of bias. So do you want to speak to what motivates this labeling, and how would you respond to this charge?
If I can just respond to the parliamentary committee, and I think I'll let Amber and the others respond. I think ये जो कह रहे हैं ना कि ये तो बिलावल के पास चले गए, nobody went to him as chairman of the PPP or co-chairperson. ये एक parliamentary, I'm sorry अगर इतने नावाकिफ हैं कि parliamentary system किस तरह से काम करता है, and that's unfortunate. So this was written, addressed to the National Assembly's Human Rights Committee, which is chaired by Bilawal Bhutto. However, the members, and especially those present, आप उस दिन की constitution देखें members की, तो ज़्यादातर तो PTI के वहाँ पे मौजूद थे, और PMLN से भी थे, और PVP के भी थे, और independent भी थे। तो ये तो across parties थे ना, आपके human rights minister भी मौजूद थी वहाँ पे। So it was, this discourse took place across parties. It was the discourse and the testimonials that were presented were also across parties. It wasn't just about one party, and it was about how do we address it. देखें, ये नहीं हो सकता कि आप एक larger pattern के बारे में बात करेंगे, लेकिन जो individual accountability है, आप उसको छोड़ देंगे. It has to be both. It has to be the people who are leading this or involved in this, and also the larger pattern.
Okay, so I mean, let's kind of circle back and speak a little bit about the government's response to this statement. So इस statement का जो एक बहुत major contention था, वो ये था कि government officials खुद instigate करते हैं ये attacks against women. जिस आप सब ने I think इस बारे में बात की है, वो ऐसी चीजें लिखते हैं अपने social media accounts पे, official accounts पे, जिनसे ये armies of trolls जो हैं वो inspire होती हैं. So अब आप लोगों की स्टेटमेंट के रिस्पॉन्स में we've seen people like Faisal Wavda, who's the Minister for Water Resources, or Shehbaz Gill, who's a special assistant to the PM, come out and directly attack the movement and some of the signatories by name, by accusing them of peddling fake news and, just kind of putting them in the spotlight. And basically, of course, this has unleashed new abuse on them. So, I mean, was this the right call by these government representatives? I mean, maybe you can take this question, Meher.
Quickly, I'll just add a few things, and then I think Maria wanted to say something. देखिए, जो आज के government officials हैं, वो कल के नहीं होंगे. जो आज हिज़्ब इख्तिलाफ में बैठे हैं, वो कल treasury benches पे बैठे होंगे. इधर तो musical chairs चलती है ना. So कहने का मकसद ये है कि जब अभी PMLN इक़्तिदार में थी, तो अगर आप देखें ना, सिर्फ इसको महदूद ना रखें to social media, तो मेरे तो शो के ऊपर आके राना सनाउल्लाह ने पता नहीं क्या-क्या इल्जाम मुंह के ऊपर बैठ के लगा दिए, और वो इतना ट्रोल हुआ, नून ने इतनी ट्रोलिंग की, and they were in power. So कहने का मकसद, I agree with Maria कि आपको देखें ना, you have to also be a little, you have to look आगे एंड यू हैव टू बी एबल टू सी कि यार कोई ऐसा काम करें कि आज अगर मैं एक, एंड ये बात दुरुस्त है कि अगर पीटीआई लीड कर रही है ट्रोलिंग के अंदर, तो ये भी बात दुरुस्त है कि पीपल्स पार्टी जनरली एक इंक्लूसिव पार्टी है, बड़ी बर्दाश्त है इनमें। इवन में देव इन गवर्नमेंट, यू रिमेंबर कितना क्रिटिसिज्म होता था, सुन लेते थे, उछलते रहते थे, इस तरह आगे निकल जाते थे। ये बर्दाश्त नून में बहुत कम है, पीटीआई में उससे भी कम है। सो ये बातें अपनी जगह दुरुस्त हैं, बट दैट इज नॉट हमारा काम टू सिट एंड इसका तयन करें कि कौन यार्ड स्टिक पे कहाँ खड़ा है। हमारा काम है कि हम बेंचमार्क लगाएं कि ये बेंचमार्क है और उसके ऊपर सारी सियासी जमातें उतरें कि इस कोड ऑफ कॉन्डक्ट के ऊपर हम सब उतरेंगे। मुझे उनकी जाती पार्टी डीएनए से ताल्लुक नहीं है, मुझे तो गाली हर एक की बुरी लगती है, मुझे पीएमएलएन दे, पीटीआई दे, इस्टेब्लिशमेंट दे, फौजी दे या कोई मौलवी दे, मुझे सबकी गाली बहुत बुरी लगती है। मैं ये नहीं कहूंगी पीटीआई पहले गाली बंद करे। और जिधर ये बात फरिया ने की, बात उनकी दुरुस्त है कि इक्तदार में जो होता है उसके ऊपर एक हायर रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी होती है 110%। तो ये तो किसी ने नहीं कहा, या कहा हो तो मुझे नहीं पता, या मैंने या मारिया या एटलीस्ट व्हाट आई एम अवेयर ऑफ,
नेवर
किसी ने नहीं कहा कि आप पीटीआई को इससे बरी कर दें, इस रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी से, या वो जो आपकी लाइन है एंड में या शुरू में आप उसको खत्म कर दें या कुछ डिलीट करें। बात तो हमने डे वन से की है, बिल्कुल इक्तदार में जिम्मेदारी है और आपके ऊपर मॉरल इखलाकी ज्यादा जिम्मेदारी है कि आप इसकी पहल करें और इसके ऊपर इकदाम करें और कुछ करते दिखाई दें हमें। सो दैट बीइंग सेड, दरख्वास्त ऐड करने की है, कुछ डिलीट करने की नहीं है। सो लेट्स नॉट काइंड ऑफ टेक इट इन अदर वे जिधर कोई कह भी नहीं रहा लेके जाने का। वो
could I just address that, because I spoke about that very quickly, and I just want to say that is actually what happened as a result of the statement. It's happened where international organizations have reached out to us in support and are talking about a more broad-based, we're talking about a more broad-based solution to the problem. And that's what was the result at the end of that National Assembly Human Rights Standing Committee, was where
I was just getting to that.
Nawal Bhutto Zardari also clearly said that it is about all political. So that has happened. It has broadened. So I think we need to move on from that.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, Amber. You're absolutely right. Bilawal did put it on record. So कहने का मकसद ये कि when you say कि, and आप सही कह रही हैं कि कवर लेटर में तो ये लिखा है, आप कवर लेटर देखिए, आप जाके टेस्टिमनी देखिए। आप किसी को ये कहना क्यों पड़ता है कि जाके कवर लेटर देखिए या जाके टेस्टिमनी पढ़िए? ये क्यों नहीं कहना पड़ता जाके स्टेटमेंट पढ़िए? बिकॉज पहली चीज जो आप उठाते हैं वो स्टेटमेंट होती है। अगर मैं टीवी प्रोग्राम करूंगी तो मैं आप किसी के भी जाती टेस्टिमोनियल्स नहीं उसके ऊपर फुटेजेस में रन करूंगी, या वो कवर लेटर, अभी तक जितने टॉक शोज हुए हैं किसी ने कवर लेटर नहीं चलाया, हर कोई स्टेटमेंट चलाता है। तो दरख्वास्त ये है कि उस स्टेटमेंट में दो लाइनें या फिक्रे ऐड कर दीजिए। नहीं ऐड हो सकते, नो प्रॉब्लम, वो भी कोई मसला नहीं है, बट यू नो एटलीस्ट at least don't put words in anyone's mouth. ये कहने का मकसद है। You're right. The onus is on the government. Absolutely.
No, Meher, we haven't put words in anybody's mouth. And अगर किसी ने cover letter पे अपने programs में नहीं चलाया तो वो उनकी journalism का मसला है, वो हमारा
नहीं, ये journalism का,
to be honest, if you haven't bothered to reach out or ask. No, if you haven't bothered to reach out or ask or find out.
Maria, you've been wanting to say something.
That I'm afraid because I think this is an important point that needs to be resolved. When we issue that statement, and I'm sorry if that statement is such a problem. I thought the debate had moved on, but it clearly hasn't. That statement, 15 people signed on it. We have 60 people who have signed on subsequently. People reached out to us, and they may not have had the same experiences, but they fully supported in solidarity. That means it resonated. We've moved on from that. Let's talk about the next. Please, let's talk about the next steps.
आई थिंक मेरीन, ये जो डिबेट है ये 2 हफ्ते पहले जहाँ खड़ी थी वो वहीं पे खड़ी है, और इसके अंदर हालांकि कई जो तजावीज बीच में जो ऑफ कोर्स सिंस वो ऑन द रिकॉर्ड नहीं है और हम कोई ऐसी बात नहीं करेंगे जो ऑन द रिकॉर्ड नहीं है, लेकिन कुछ तजावीज मैंने भी फ्लोट की थी, आई गेस आप सब लोगों ने पढ़ ली होंगी, और बाकी जगह से भी तजावीज आ रही है। मेरा इंटरेस्ट है कि टू टेक दिस प्रोसेस फॉरवर्ड, और उसमें तरीकेकार ये है कि जो ओरिजिनल स्टेटमेंट है वी रियली एडमिटेड कि उन्होंने किया, इट्स देयर स्टोरी, इट्स देयर prerogative, how they want to do it, how they want to say it. If they do not want to add anything in it, fair enough, it's their call. But we believe that there is more to it. So there's a solution to that. The solution is that we sort of build something upon that statement that's already out, and then we can make it more inclusive, and we can build we can put in other stories as well, and then of course it will amplify the voice that was originally raised by these women. So that is where my focus is. If we keep on saying कि भी हम वो उसको change कर लेंगे या ये कर लेंगे, वो नहीं होने वाला, we all know that, and it's okay. I think let's move on. और moving on का तरीकाकार यही है कि we build something, and it's my own understanding. Not everyone is supposed to agree to me कि भाई आगे चले, और अभी ये जो opportunity खुली है, ये जो दरवाजा खुला है, इसको आपस की जो मिसअंडरस्टैंडिंग भी कह लें या मॉडस ऑपरेंडाई के ऊपर हम कह लें कि इत्तेफाक नहीं है, जो कोर हमारा ऑब्जेक्टिव है उस पे सबका इत्तेफाक है। क्या ये हम सबके साथ नहीं हो रहा है, इस पे हम सबका इत्तेफाक है। क्या जो है इसके बारे में कुछ नहीं किया जाना चाह रहा, इस पे हम सबका इत्तेफाक है। सो इसको आगे ले जाने का यही तरीका है कि अगर एक जो ओरिजिनल वुमेन है जिन्होंने ये स्टेटमेंट दी है उसमें तब्दीली नहीं करना चाहती, फेयर इनफ, इट्स ओके, इट्स देयर स्टोरी, देयर प्रेरोगेटिव, आई हैव सेड दिस बिफोर, वी शुड बिल्ड समथिंग अपॉन इट. And that's, I think this process will be taken forward.
So even if there's a new statement which is more broad or inclusive, you know, as you say, would you sign the first statement?
Well, I would say कि अगर मुझे पहली स्टेटमेंट साइन करनी होती तो मुझे 2 दफा उनसे राब्ता किया, मैं उसकी प्रिंसिपली मॉडस ऑपरेंडी से डिसएग्री करती हूँ मेरीन, and it's not that I don't, and I've like had conversations about it with women and they understood where I was coming from. So why it's telling me कि आप वो करेंगी, it's sort of like कि मुझे लगता है कि मैं उसी पुल पे यूं भागी जा रही हूँ, जबकि मुझे उस पुल को क्रॉस करना है। मैं इधर पहुंचती हूँ, मुझे खींच के वापस ले आते हैं। I want to cross this bridge and move on to next one, to beg bigger, better things that are waiting for us, bigger battles to pick. What is this battle, man? We have bigger battles, bigger fights to pick with with real people who are not an ally. We are allies. We have to understand that.
You know, can I just add this? Yeah, the point is we cannot let the cause define us and our relationships and where we stand, and that's what it's unfortunately doing. We have to define the cause and we have to determine कि ये इसका मंतकी अंजाम क्या होगा। तो मुझे that's all that I want to add to it. Like honestly, it's अगर cause पे सब committed हैं तो बिस्मिल्लाह, it doesn't matter यार, आप इधर से आए, आप इधर से आए, आप end में सारे साथ खड़े हैं ना।
Farieha, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, so I mean, there's consensus from my sense, right? कि abuse भी होता है, तमाम जमातें करती हैं, और जो इक़्तिदार में है उन पे जिम्मेदारी भी ज्यादा बनती है। और हमने जो आगे का सोचना है कि एक स्टेटमेंट आई, इससे दरवाजा खुला है, इससे कोई इशू नहीं है, क्योंकि ये उनका उतने ज़बानी अपने कहा है, ये उनके एक्सपीरियंसेस हैं। Others signed on in support, including me. मेरा कोई अपना ज़ाती कोई एक्सपीरियंस नहीं था, but I understood what this is about and why it's important to hold, a particular party. लेकिन वहाँ से शुरू हुआ, नेशनल असेंबली की मीटिंग में भी ये तमाम बातें हो गई कि बाकी पार्टीज भी हैं, और ये ज़रूरी है देखना कि ये किस तरह से प्रोग्रेशन हुआ है इसका, ठीक है? तो वो स्टेटमेंट भी आप ओन करें, बाकी आगे जो तमाम बातें हुई है वो भी ओन करने की जरूरत है। इसको बुनियाद बनाते हुए किसी को रोका नहीं गया, और सब अपने ज़बानी इसमें शामिल कर सकते हैं, अपने एक्सपीरियंसेस आप ऐड कर सकते हैं। लेकिन फिर आगे वे फॉरवर्ड अगर आप देखें तो रमशा जहांगीर जो एक थी सिग्नेटरी इस पे, उन्होंने अपने ट्विटर अकाउंट के जरिए एक ड्राफ्ट कोड ऑफ कॉन्डक्ट भी शेयर किया है कि क्या एक पॉलिसी है जो कि हुकूमत के नुमाइंदे भी अडॉप्ट करें और पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज भी। और ये फर्क जरूरी है, क्योंकि जब हुकूमत की बात कर रहे हैं तो आज हम सिर्फ ये नहीं कह रहे कि सिर्फ रूलिंग पार्टी या पीटीआई, आगे कोई भी आएगा हुकूमत में, कोई भी इन वजारतों को लीड करेगा, वो पॉलिसी होनी चाहिए। इट्स अ डिफरेंट स्टैंडर्ड जो पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज को फॉलो करना होगा, और हुकूमत के जो मिनिस्ट्रीज और जो सोशल मीडिया के अकाउंट्स होंगे उनको थोड़ा मुख्तलिफ किस्म से ये अडॉप्ट करना होगा, इसको इवॉल्व भी होना होगा। सो द पॉइंट इज दैट वी नाउ इन टर्म्स ऑफ मूविंग फॉरवर्ड एड योर वॉइसेस टू एन एग्जिस्टिंग प्रोसेस, जो कि है जिसको कोई डिनाई नहीं कर रहा, और ये वजाहत होनी चाहिए, क्लैरिटी इन मेन स्ट्रीम होनी चाहिए। और जो डिस्क्रेडिटिंग इसकी बुनियाद पे जो अभी भी हुकूमत के नुमाइंदे कर रहे हैं या बाकी कर रहे हैं, उनको ये भी मालूम होना चाहिए कि ये एक्सपीरियंस है, इसको आप झुटला नहीं सकते। See, the problem begins is when you don't even accept that this is happening, right? And so यहाँ अगर हमने एक्सेप्ट कर लिया है, लेकिन अगर आगे चलने की बात है तो चलें हम आपस में कंसेंसस कर लेंगे। जिन लोगों ने ये चीजें अडॉप्ट करनी है, पॉलिसी बनानी है, उसको फिर अपने मेंबरान को पाबंद करना है, अगर उनमें अब तक ये एक्नॉलेजमेंट ही नहीं है कि ये हो रहा है और ये जरूरी है कि इसको हम एड्रेस करें, So then there's, again, you're at loggerheads, you hit a wall, and how do you proceed forward? So that is why that solidarity is very, very important, that we steer it in a direction where it's going to be about accountability now and accountability in the future.
I'd like to add something, because I think we haven't addressed this, is the reaction that we got as well. So while we put out that statement, and Shri Mazari was the Human Rights Minister representing PTI, who's also been a victim of a lot of terrible sexism and comments about her and her parents, and including her daughter as well. And she acknowledged that at the meeting as well. But it isn't as if anybody reached out, because we have to remember that, as Meher also pointed out, कि अगर officials कर रहे होते, जैसे मारी आपका भी experience रहा है, officials, when they tweet something, so it's called dog whistling, and it uses coded language. Fake news, which is very Trump-like, is one of them. Agenda-driven journalism is another one, and we're still getting it. कि ये जो Maryam Nawaz और Bilawal Nawaz हैं, वो ये सब कर रहे हैं. It's an agenda. So agenda-driven journalism, lifafe, lifafi. That's another one that gets used because, gender, and also fake news. So these things are continuing, and they're being spurred on by people who are representatives of the government. We would like engagement, and the social media code that we're putting together, try to, in the effort to move this forward, is कि कोशिश तो यही है ना, लेकिन at least कुछ engagement तो हो, acknowledgement तो हो. As Farieha pointed out, there's no acknowledgement even कि ये होता है. हालांकि when we were putting together documentation, we saw that there were a lot of links, as there are a lot of links on abusive accounts that other political parties leaders follow as well. So ये सब हो रहा है. But we haven't addressed that core issue as well, where we want at least the ruling party here, who are again responsible, have resources, have official and unofficial social media accounts, to at least acknowledge or engage with us, talk to us instead of talking at us, accusing us of an agenda, denying our experience. And this is where we're at. So as much as we would like to move forward, and we're trying our best to, I think the lack of acknowledgement or engagement is something that I think is a problem.
I can see that happening actually, Amber. You're spot on, and I see that they are talking back to you essentially, and it is like एक महाज खड़ा हो गया. But honestly, I will tell you here what I would tell you off the record as well. कि there's always a strategy to things, right? The art of war. It's ऐवी नहीं वो इतनी thick किताब. हर चीज की एक strategy है. So ये I would ask you then as a colleague कि यार जब ये लेकर आ रहे थे तो तब mentally prepared तो हो गए. कोई तो होगा prepared कि यार ये backlash आएगा. वो भी अगर PTI जैसी जमात है. Of course आना था. I would have told you. I'm sure you're so smart yourself. You should have seen this coming. कि आएगा ये कोई भी और जमात होती by the way, नून या PTI. अगर उनको इस तरह आपने उनको कहा होता ना और हुकूमत में होते तो और बाकी कर भी रहे होते और कर रहे हैं. वो फिर भी they would have politicized it. हर जमात politicize करेगी अपने favor में. नून, PPP, PTI हर कोई करेगा. So if they are talking back at you and they will not engage with you, मुझे लगता है. I am just only trying to understand the situation until we actually say कि यार yes तुम लोग करते हो, तुम पे ज़्यादा onus है, because आप लोग government में हैं और आप लोग इसको address करें and talk to us, engage with us, और ये बाकी सियासी जमातें भी करेंगी, तब I think real engagement आएगी. अभी तो ये
exactly what we're doing. And yes, you're absolutely right, Meher. I mean, I didn't expect a backlash nahi hoga. Because I think it is very hard to see responsibility. जब हुकूमत में होते हैं, जब आप वैसे you're in power and there is also that power imbalance here that we've noticed as well. So there are 4 or 5 journalists that are being particularly targeted. Isme Memon, Benazir, Rima is one of them, myself as well. And then there is government ministers and spokespersons. So they're not going to, they're in power, they're not going to see it. There will be a backlash, there will be a reaction, which is why, I really believe the way to move forward is, and this was the initial idea. I just want to point out that if you are together and responding to these in some way without denying the experience of that first statement, it would actually make a huge difference. Instead of at least tacitly or quietly allowing this to continue, support would be great.
So, I mean, I want to just maybe use this as a way to move a little bit away from the statement and talk about some broader issues. How, maybe we can explain to our readers, Amber, you've just talked about the fact that government से कोई response नहीं आई, PTI ने अपने आप को distance नहीं किया. वो ये तो कह सकते हैं ना कि यार ये हर बंदा जो ट्वीट करता है वो हमारे नाम पे ट्वीट कर रहा होता है, लेकिन हमने उसको एम्प्लॉय नहीं किया हुआ, राइट? सो आई मीन इफ यू कुड do you guys think that these parties, whether it's the PTI, PPP, or someone else, are they directly involved in leading these campaigns? Are there like paid trolls sitting in basements churning out hashtags? Or is it just the attitude of various groups and parties, the public positions they take that instigates trolls to engage in targeted abuse in their name? So, just, we like as insiders, I think we have an understanding of this, but if we could explain to listeners, कि ये है क्या, system कैसे चलता है? Whoever wants to take this.
I'd like to sort of just quickly, briefly, I think at the time, a few months ago, just very recently in June, there was a documentary by Al Jazeera on Farhan Virk, who is very, very infamous on social media. And he's been associated with the PTI for a very, very long time. And I think that documentary, because these were things that people had been talking about and formerly knew about. But he talked about, it wasn't just about India and Modi. Which is where he was, he said he derived a lot of power as well. But these social media cells and these hashtags and these trends that Mari also talked about in terms of the People's Party as well, how this was a really effective tool. And he talked about journalists, and he talked about the media, and he talked about the alt-right and their strategies, Steve Bannon, for instance, which is what we see. So we talk about fake news, that's Trump and the alt-right. We talk about, targeting specific journalists or media organizations as being part of an agenda, which is Indian or raw. So he spoke very openly about it, which I suspect many wouldn't do now because he has been ousted from their particular circle as well. So I think that was actually a real, I think that sort of documented how this is developed, and it's been taken here. And he was associated with the PTI. That being said, I want to clarify that these hashtags and trends are being run by People's Party, and so एक के बाद एक इतना कि खरबूजे से खरबूजे रंग पकड़ता है, ऐसा ही लग रहा है ना? तो
essentially इनकी this is just part of what they do now. I mean, it's not ad hoc. It's not kind of it's not accidental. This is just part of the program. This is how these parties operate now. They have these cells. And if you disagree with them or if you're critical of them, they will unleash people on you.
Can I add to this? Yes. I think, but Meher was trying to say something. I'll let Maria and Meher, if they want to say something, then I'll add to this.
I would want to say that कि भाई आप एक ऐसी स्टेट के अंदर बैठे हैं जहाँ पे आपका नेशनल नैरेटिव ही ये है कि आप पे 5th जनरेशन वॉरफेयर जो है वो वेज कर दी गई है, और वो जो वॉरफेयर है वो सोशल मीडिया के जरिए होगी. तो आपकी अंडरस्टैंडिंग जो आपको बताया जा रहा है आपके नेशनल नैरेटिव में बात डाली जा रही है, और यही चीजें तमाम नीचे सीप भी करती है ना निचले लेवल पर जाकर. पहले जो था ये मैदान बिल्कुल खुला था. इसमें जो एक ओरिजिनल थॉट प्रोसेस होता था, आप वो पसंद करें या ना करें, कोई अच्छी जबान इस्तेमाल करता था, बुरी जबान इस्तेमाल करता था 2010-12 में, वो उसका अपना तरीकाकार है, और वो स्क्रीनशॉट्स और वो जो सब चीजें वो उसको खुद को ही डिफेंड करना है, वो बात नहीं. लेकिन एटलीस्ट इस तरह से वेपनाइज तरीके से जत्थे के जत्थे सोशल मीडिया पे विंग्स जो थे, जो कि इनको अपने पेरोल पे रखा जाता था. एक जमात के अंदर तो 5 हैं जो 5 मुख्तलिफ शख्सियात के अपने अपने पेरोल्स के ऊपर हैं, और वो ऑलमोस्ट डिक्लेयर्ड है. एवरीबडी नोज अबाउट इट. इफ समवन डिसएग्री, इसको डिनाई भी नहीं कर सकते बिकॉज एवरीबडी नोज दैट दे एग्जिस्ट. और अब मैं रीसेंट ट्रेंड यही मैं बात कर रही हूँ, इट्स अ पैटर्न. नाउ रिसेंटली आई हैव सीन अदर पार्टीज आल्सो पिकिंग इट अप. TLP वो एक्चुअली मुझ पे फतवे लगवा रहे थे बिकॉज आई सेड कि भाई ये धरना उठाएं, दिस इज नॉट प्रॉपर. मैंने अपने शो के ऊपर एक 8 साल बच्ची को बुला लिया, हु वाज एन अचीवर. शी डिड समथिंग, शी हैड सम, कोई वर्ल्ड टाइटल उसने जीत लिया, एंड शी वाज अहमदी, एंड शी सेड के मैं सर जफरुल्लाह को पसंद करती हूँ, और उसके खिलाफ मेरे हैशटैग्स चल गए, मेरी वीडियोस वायरल हो गई, व्हाट्सएप हो गई, मेरी मैनेजमेंट को कहा गया ये क्या आप लोग अहमदियों के एजेंडे के ऊपर काम कर रहे हैं. सो अगेन व्हाट आई एम ट्राइंग टू टेल यू हियर, देयर इज अ पैटर्न. It's if we are attacking some वो लोग जो हमें पसंद नहीं है, जो कि collectively believe me, किसी को ये ट्रोलिंग जो है ये across the board सबकी होती है. अगर किसी का ख्याल है कि फलानी जगह से फलाने शख्सियात की ट्रोलिंग नहीं होती क्योंकि उनकी शायद political affiliations उनके साथ हैं, तो ये मैं आपका जो अगर कुछ लोग ऐसा समझते हैं तो मैं ये तासुर दुरुस्त कर लूं, ऐसा बिल्कुल नहीं है. अगर आप देखती हूँ वो 50 ट्वीट्स उनके हक में भी करेंगे, अगर वो एक उनके खिलाफ भी करेंगे तो उस एक ट्वीट के ऊपर भी उनकी उतनी ही बजेगी जितनी की वो 50 हक ना करने पे नहीं हुई. तो सो इफ यू थिंक कि जी ये सिर्फ एक सर्टेन स्ट्रेटा को कोई रिलीफ की बात हो रही है, या जो हम किसी एक तरफ पे जरा ज्यादा एम्फसाइज डालने करने की बात हो रही है, सो इट्स रॉन्ग. अगेन आई वुड क्लोज माय आर्गुमेंट, आई होप, ऑन दिस टॉपिक कि भाई पैटर्न, identify the pattern, attack the pattern, and sort of try to, smash it. Otherwise, वो हाइड्रा की तरह नहीं सर, हमेशा उठते जाएंगे, वही काटते रहेंगे हम, ये लड़ाइयाँ. Instead of talking to them, we are talking at each other, and I think it's pretty much their mission accomplished.
Farieha?
So, see, the thing is, जो ये global trend पे है, right? If you see US elections में जो हुआ है और जिस level पे हुआ है, उसके बाद congressional hearings भी हुई हैं कि social media का इस्तेमाल कैसे किया जा रहा है, उसमें जिस तरह से पैसे और वसाइल भी, और फिर एक political so government एक दूसरे से political warfare के लिए कैसे इस्तेमाल कर रही हैं. So these are all realities of today. कुछ साल पहले तक सोशल मीडिया पाकिस्तान में उस तरह की अहमियत नहीं रखता था. आज, और मैं क्योंकि इस स्पेस में 2010 से खासतौर पर जो सेंसरशिप और जो बंदिश है वेबसाइट्स की, उस हवाले से बहुत ज़्यादा काम है. मैं कुछ साल पहले अब बहुत ज़्यादा ये कहती हूँ कि पहले फेसबुक, ट्विटर वगैरह उस तरह से बंद हो जाता था. आज तो ये दूसरे ऐप्स के पीछे पड़े हुए, टिकटॉक वगैरह. लेकिन बेसिकली अब क्योंकि स्टेट के लिए ये यूटिलिटी एक है और स्टेट भी इसको इस्तेमाल करती है, इसको वेपनाइज करती है, पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज भी करते हैं. सो इट इज नो लॉन्गर रिटन ऑफ एज ये एलीट प्लेटफॉर्म, इस पे तो होता कौन है, क्योंकि आज इनके जो नैरेटिव, और आज नैरेटिव बिल्डिंग ही आपके सबसे ज्यादा बड़ा, जो जैसे मारिया ने भी कहा था कि ये 5th जनरेशन वॉरफेयर, तमाम चीजें, नैरेटिव बिल्डिंग आपकी यही हो रही है, आपकी ऑल्टरनेट स्पेस यही रह गई है. Still not a free space. It's a misconception. जो लोग कहते हैं ना कि हाँ लेकिन देखो बिल्कुल खुले आज़ादी है, आज़ादी बिल्कुल नहीं है. It's a complete fallacy. If you look at how the cybercrime law is also weaponized dissidents के खिलाफ, so abuse वगैरह बिल्कुल हो रहा है. किसकी पकड़ होती है, किसकी नहीं होती, उसमें आप फर्क देखें, उसमें तजाद देखें क्या है. केसेस एक ट्वीट के बुनियाद पे भी बना दिए जाते हैं, फिर आप धक्के खाते रहे अदालतों के, और जहाँ पे ये अब्यूज है वो तो आता रहता है. So also not every solution lies in regulation and legislation, and हम वो भी देख चुके हैं कि how it is ineffective. However, that is not an excuse कि जहाँ पे आपको जब harassment की complaint होती है, या particularly अगर कोई लेके जाता है FIA, तो आप ये नहीं कि उन औरतों को भी वापस भेज दें या वहाँ पे भी victim blaming शुरू कर दें. So जहाँ पे तो properly आपने address करना है वो करें. The dynamics are going to evolve. अगर आप स्टैनफोर्ड की अभी recently published report देखें, बहुत investigative pieces भी आए हैं कि खुसूसी तौर पे कुछ issues पे कुछ political parties, कुछ governments, they've poured money into it. They've got teams. ये शुरू हुआ था social media wings, ये आज की बात नहीं है, काफी अरसे से अब ये हो रहा है. जब state की भी नजर इस तरफ पड़ रही है, cases बन रहे हैं, तो वो भी कुछ सोच के, क्योंकि इसकी एक मकबूलियत है. This narrative matters, whether it's one tweet or campaigns, right? So you have to look at it from that larger point of view, something that is happening locally and globally. और हम जो आखिरी चीज मैं कहना चाहूंगी, जो हम कह रहे हैं ना कि institutionalized approach, जो मारिया भी कह रही कि individual basis पे ना हो, so point ये था कि आप इस issue को flag करो, आप अब आगे बात को बढ़ाओ कि ये कितना widespread है, इसके implications क्या हैं, which is what was actually done. And अब ये है कि the point is कि ये जो weaponization है, ये जो culture of abuse है, ये institutionalize ना हो जाए. ये जो रियासत की resources हैं, इस तरफ ना लग जाएं. अभी 42 million rupees Ministry of Information and Broadcasting को दिए गए social media wings के लिए. So there needs to be clarity कि आज ये है, कल कोई और रकम होगी, आपके टैक्स के पैसों से जाती है, कल कोई और हुकूमत आएगी. So ये चीजें institutionalize ना हो, इन मकासद के लिए इस्तेमाल ना किए जाएं. Which is why it was important to flag it, to talk about the party in power, but now also talk about those who remain in opposition, and tomorrow whoever is going to form government, कि अब वो code of conducts की बात की जाए, उन policies की बात की जाए, not for regulating citizens, but making sure कि ये भी पाबंद हो, इनके भी कोई दायरा हो, चाहे वो हुकूमत हो या political party हो, उनको भी महदूद किया जाए.
I would just quickly like to add to it कि इस पे तो कोई I think Farieha spot on कि ये social media हो, digital space हो, it's being used for policy, for communication, for as a breaking news tool. तो इससे तो बिल्कुल मैं whoever thinks कि ये बहुत बात का बतंगड़ हम बना रहे हैं या इस issue को ज़्यादा हाइप दे रहे हैं, they're in denial and they're stupid. Like I mean, look around you. Essentially, there's citizen journalists all around you. Everybody who has a laptop or a mobile is like Sichuan earthquake in China, जो है वो एक किसी आदमी की ट्वीट की वजह से बीबीसी ने उठाया था। इसी तरह आपको 2009 की बाली बॉम्बिंग्स आप देखें तो वो अथॉरिटीज से पहले आपको सोशल मीडिया के अंदर ये खबर ब्रेक हो गई थी। एंड देयर सो मेनी, ईरान के प्रेसिडेंशियल इलेक्शंस के ऊपर प्रोटेस्ट अमेरिका में है, अमेरिका ट्विटर को कह रहा है होल्ड ऑफ योर मेंटेनेंस फॉर अ व्हाइल बिकॉज वी वांट दिस प्रोटेस्ट टू बी रजिस्टर्ड। आई मीन there is absolutely no debate on the fact that regarding the importance, the significance, the impact of social media or the digital space. So let's not, I mean, I 100% agree with what she's saying. Let's not, जो भी इसके ऊपर हमसे बहस करे तो उससे पे शायद engage ही नहीं करना चाहिए. Maybe they don't understand the real world we're in today. It's defining journalism. It's defining the world we live in. It's defining everything. And that being said, I think to move on, we need to actually just kind of add more punch. अभी अंबर बात कर रही थी कि आप endorse करें, तो I think कि हम तो हर सांस के अंदर endorse करते हैं, अंबर का, मेमल का, बेनजीर का, इन सब का initiative endorse करते हैं, इनकी struggles को endorse करते हैं, what they're going through endorse करते हैं. So इसके ऊपर क्यों बार बार बात आ जाती है? आप यकीन माने आपको endorse करते हैं because हमारी कहानी और cause एक है. अब आएं जरा सी पहल करें, इसको आगे लेके चलते हैं.
Guys, I mean, we've got about like 5 minutes left, and there are people who are asking questions. So, I mean, one of the things I want to ask you guys about is that this perception that online threats are harmless and meaningless. And this is, again, for all of you, what are some of the direct kind of offline impacts of online threats in your experience? When have they become real world threats? I mean, aap mein se kisi ke saath ye hua hai that, I mean, you can also talk about how the fear carries over into your life offline, but has it ever happened that the online harassment, attacks, threats have become something, much scarier? Whoever wants to go.
So
okay, go.
I'll just quickly add.
There has a story about everything, na? Personal story about everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I'm telling you. It's really true. मोहाली के अंदर आपके या क्या कौन सा क्रिकेट मैच हुआ था इंडिया के अंदर बैक इन द डे, तब बहरहाल स्टैंप लग गया था कि यू आर अ रॉ एजेंट, क्योंकि उधर तस्वीरें निकल आई थी हूटिंग, आई वाज इन द थिंग एंड देयर वर अदर जर्नलिस्ट्स विद मी टू, बट बहरहाल वाज अ प्राइवेट ट्रिप. And that's when the Qari Muhammad was his name, जिसका मैं आपको बता रही हूँ. उसने and he had the backing of institutions. Okay, so I know what I'm saying on record here. वो जिधर पहुंचा उसने अपनी लोकेशन बताई, उसने टाइम बताया कि तुम्हें कत्ल मेरे ऊपर अब फर्ज है और वाजिब है और तुम्हें कत्ल मैं इस टाइम पे करूंगा. ये था before marriage. After marriage they've been several times because again so many sectarian organizations. अगर I don't think it's safe कि हम नाम लें क्योंकि बड़ी मुश्किल से neutralize कराया है. अगर आप कहते हैं तो ले भी लेती हूँ. I wasn't able to sit in the car and travel with my kids for months at an end. Because my parents and my in-laws said, sorry, if you want, this is your profession, well and good. You're not going to endanger our grandchildren's lives. You're not going to pick them up from school. You're not going to take them out for ice cream. You're not going for family dinners. And this is life. We live with this. So you want to add माँ बहन की गालियाँ on social media to that, तो वो तो वही वाली बात हो जाती है ना कि आप बिल्कुल ही रोन दो किसी को. So yeah, these are बहुत examples हैं यार. Life.
I would want to add over here my, जैसे कहते हैं ना, experience. It became very raw and real during the 2014 का धरना. I was working for a network, Geo Network, which didn't see eye to eye with PTI at that time. और actually physical attacks थे on our offices. अगर हम कहीं बाहर transmissions करने जाते थे, I've been attacked twice. एक दफा तो capture भी है, it's on television. I was doing the transmissions, standing on DSNG, stones pelted at me, and खैर I just मैंने बंद करके transmission, I sat in my car and left. So I think कि वो पूरी जो एक raw चल जाती है, एक hashtag चल जाता है, फिर जहाँ भी उन्होंने मेरा mic देखा, मेरी DSNG देखी, मेरा card देखा और उन्होंने कहा जी बस ठीक है, she's fair game. और मैं नहीं कहूँगी सिर्फ खातून, मेरे साथ जो मेरे कैमरामैन, मेरा बाकी क्रू, everybody had to face it because I was just the face of that transmission. तो मैं अपनी बात कर सकती हूँ. तो it became very real, especially जब 2014 में they were coming to Geo's office और कहीं PTV के बाद इधर आ रहे हैं, तो मैं जैसे कहते हैं ना, सही में आपकी blast हो जाती. मेरी उस दिन काफी blast हो गई थी. But again अब पीछे जब देखते हैं, so that's why I have this unique distinction कि पता नहीं I'm lucky or my networks become unlucky or I become unlucky. Wherever I go somehow उनका कोई फड्डा ऐसा हो जाता है. 2016 के बाद जी उस वक्त सिटिंग गवर्नमेंट के साथ फड्डा हो गया, बॉयकॉट भी हो गया और उस वक्त भी ऐसी एक हेटफुल कैंपेन चली. तो उधर से बेशुमार गालियां पड़ी। 2014 में माशाल्लाह जो दूसरा मैंने आपको बताया पीटीआई, उधर से बेशुमार गालियां पड़ी। इसके अलावा ये जो है तमाम टीएलपी से गालियां पड़ चुकी हैं, तमाम मजहबी जमातों से। देन अगेन द एस्टैब्लिशमेंट ट्रोल्स, दे डोंट लाइक समथिंग, दे डू इट टू यू। सो अगेन हैविंग सेड दैट, कि अभी शुक्र है वी आर ऑल सिटिंग हियर, और थोड़ा सा हम हंस के या थोड़ा सा बात बताने, हम स्टोरी बताने जोगे हैं। मतलब ये here, अल्लाह का शुक्र है, we were safe as a result of that. But not everyone is so lucky. Not everyone has that privilege like the one we have. So we should like really realize our privilege and use it for heaven's sake. मतलब मैं इसी पे I think I would want to.
और and not just use it यार, make sure कि यार अगर ये कर ही दिया है और इतना strong और एक अच्छा initiative कुछ लड़कियों ने ले ही लिया खड़े होके यार, so then like really take it somewhere जिधर हमारे बाद जो लड़कियां आएंगी जो इस want to be active journalists and reporting, उनको कहीं ना कोई तो कवर मिला हो कि यार इतना तो ये कर गए थे, इसको हम आगे और लेके जाते हैं.
Amber, you have 30 seconds if you want.
Yeah, I mean, it's specific direct. I think because Khatmin Nubuwat wala jo oath taking wala issue tha, I did quite a few programs on it as well. Blasphemy pe maine Mashal Khan ho, Asiya Bibi ho, us pe bhi maine programs kiye the. I would get a lot of messages on Facebook and Twitter from what I assumed, again, one doesn't quite know, jo TLP linked accounts there. And I didn't realize the consequences of that until actually a year and a half later. And I was covering the TLP for an Al Jazeera documentary. And I was in a crowd, ye Pindi mein hi kar rahe the, and मैं खड़ी हुई थी, filming कर रही थी, piece cameras कर रहे थे, तो somebody came up to me and said, you were so and so, or ये वो. So I was, उस वक्त my cameraman was a little far away, and then we moved in. उसके बाद, he sort of followed me, and then एक वो after I made a few interviews, वो पूरा they surrounded me and they had to be taken out. So I mean, I think that's what happens. Also, Meher and Maria, you would know this better because I'm relatively new to mainstream television, and that is a danger. That is a danger that a lot of women on mainstream faces because they become relatively well known. लोगों को पता होता है उनके दफ्तर कहाँ हैं. आप निकलते हैं तो वो आपको पहचान लेते हैं. So if they connect you to something that you said on television, something that you may have said on social media, you don't know who will be triggered by what, and that's the genuine constant fear.
It's actually
there's a perspective, but I think that's also.
Sorry.
We'll continue this conversation offline now because I'm being nudged to kind of wrap it up. So it's been amazing talking to all of you, and I really hope that this has shed some light for our listeners on how real, and traumatizing online abuse is, and how the gendered nature of this abuse, how terrible that is. I'm super proud of all of you for having immense staying power. And I really hope that this, process that some of us have started goes somewhere, translates into something bigger and better. So thank you all for being part of this conversation. And that's it from LUMS Live 40th edition. Thank you and Khuda.